U.S. President Donald Trump has blamed migrants in Europe for violently changing the culture and the rise in crime in Germany. Now, in a series of Twitter posts, Donald Trump has claimed that Germany's leaders are losing public support over the migration issue. At the same time, President Trump is trying to defend his own administration's widely criticized policy on illegal immigration. Contrary to Trump's assertion, figures show that crime levels have fallen in Germany. Last month, the country's internal ministry reported that criminal offenses totaled 5.76 million in 2017, the lowest crime rate recorded in Germany in more than 30 years. Well, let's get some reactions now to President Donald Trump's remarks. And let's go to Daniel Ranches from Washington. Daniel, what prompted that kind of comment, though, from the U.S. President regarding Germany's migration policy?
Well, as you know, the G7 meeting, after Donald Trump left, the German government released a photo suggesting that Angela Merkel, who was sort of glaring over Donald Trump in a look of disdain. Donald Trump did not like the release of that photo because he said that it basically was put out of context, and actually they were having a good meeting at the time. So I think there's a little bit of political gloating going around because of the fact that Angela Merkel's in a more vulnerable political position right now. Secondly, the Trump administration certainly has some supporters who support a very ideological version of anti-migration sentiment that finds an audience here in the United States. But lastly, I think most importantly, over the weekend, there's been a massive backlash to the policy that has been implemented in recent weeks to separate children from their parents at the border when parents are detained. This has caused a massive backlash among many conservatives, evangelicals, Catholics, and many other religious groups. So certainly I think there is somewhat of a political crisis over this policy, and that's probably part of Donald Trump's attempt to defend himself politically during this time.
Well, let's cross over to Berlin, because I'm now joined by Guy Henderson. Get his comments on those remarks as well. Guy, how have these remarks by the U.S. president, though, been received in Germany? And is the country really suffering from its open door policy to refugees?
Well, various polls across Europe over the time since Donald Trump has taken office consistently show that the US president is least popular in Germany out of all of those European countries. And so I think there is widespread aggravation. Donald Trump continually singles out Germany, has done on the campaign trail all the way to the presidency, whether it's on trade, whether it's on migration, whether it's personal attacks on the leadership here. I think what particularly irks Germans is the US president's apparent willingness to depart with the facts to try and make his point. So in his tweet, he talks about how crime in Germany is way up. That is just an inaccurate statement. So that is something that really riles a lot of Germans, whether they are critics of Angela Merkel's migration policies or not. That is, something that definitely irks them. There is no doubt that there is a big debate here about whether Germany has taken the right path, about whether Germany can bring about a European solution in terms of managing the number of new arrivals from both North Africa and from the Middle East, from Turkey into Greece, and also whether it can integrate those people into the workforce, whether they have the language skills, whether they have the education. That is a serious debate here. It is a serious challenge. But I think on the whole, a high level of aggravation amongst politicians, amongst the public, about the way Donald Trump is approaching and weighing in these domestic issues.
Right, those migration issues still dominating global headlines. Daniel and Guy, do stay with us for the moment, because we are going to go to another migration story here. A top UN official has called on the United States to end the forceful separation of children from their migrant parents. Democratic Party lawmakers recently gained access to one of the centers suspected to be holding children who had been separated from their parents when they tried to enter the U.S. seeking asylum.
Shut it down! Shut it down!
This is one of the centers suspected to be holding children separated from their migrant parents. It is believed that 2,000 young people are being held in facilities just like this in the U.S. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has urged the United States government to end the practice.
The thought that any state would seek to deter parents by inflicting such abuse on children is unconscionable. I call on the United States to immediately end the practice of forcible separation of these children, and I encourage the government to at last ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child in order to ensure that the fundamental rights of all children, whatever their administrative status, will be at the center of all domestic laws and policies.
Democratic lawyers have gained access to one of the facilities in New Jersey. They say about 289 children are being held there.
We have heard of children being physically pulled from the arms of their parents, nursing babies being separated from their mothers, children with disabilities being taken from their parents, and most recently a distraught father choosing to take his own life rather than live apart from his children. These are the misdeeds of an administration speaking in our name that appears to lack a moral compass, that stands in defiance of our nation's history as a beacon of freedom and a refuge for the oppressed, and that shames our country by the actions it has taken.
The U.S. government has confirmed that the children were separated from their parents at the Mexico border between April and May. This is part of the Trump administration enforcement of stricter border controls.
I will tell you that nobody likes this policy. You saw the president on camera, that he wants this to end, but everybody has, Congress has to act.
Former U.S. First Lady Barbara Bush and current First Lady Melania Trump have also spoken out against the policy. Vic Chege, CGTN.
Right. Daniel, to you first, though, on that forceful separation of children from their migrant parents in the United States. Now, the UN Rights Agency chief has heavily criticized the U.S. on its migration policy. What is the response from the government likely to be?
Well, the response from the government so far to this issue has been somewhat mixed messages, to say the least. So in the first instance, there were suggestions from cabinet-level officials that this was a deliberate policy in order to dissuade other migrants from coming to the United States. Then others then denied that it was a deliberate policy, while then that it was pointed out to the administration that it must be a deliberate policy because the Obama administration found ways of complying with the law without separating children from their families in a distressing way. And we've had reports of at least 2,000 cases in which this has happened over the last few months. But now facing a huge onslaught of criticism from all sides of the political spectrum, as you were reporting there. The Trump administration is again trying to find out which message will resonate with the public without really coming out with anything very clear. So Donald Trump himself is doubling down on the notion that there must be an incentive to keep other migrants from coming into the country, and therefore, essentially defending this as a policy matter. So we are in a state of chaos at the moment. But I think it's fair to say that the Trump administration now has to sort of reformulate, look at its strategy going forward, and see what kind of a policy response they can get out of this without losing face, and also without harming children's psychological and emotional health.
And back to the European Union, though, there, Guy, to you in Berlin, because the European Union has been grappling with the whole question of immigration for years now. And a German minister has been quoted as saying the country might turn away migrants from July if no European deal is agreed upon. What more can you tell us about Angela Merkel's attempt to find a workable solution to the migration crisis?
Yeah, little doubt that when Donald Trump sent out that tweet, he knew that Angela Merkel here in Berlin was facing perhaps the most serious challenge to her leadership in the 12 years that she has been the Chancellor of Germany. And over the weekend here in the weekend press, there were even questions around whether her coalition government could fall this week, around whether her days as leader of this country were coming to an end. Essentially, the German Interior Minister had threatened to release a migration master plan which would have involved defying a key part of Germany's, Angela Merkel's, open door policies. It would have given the police, the national police force, the right to refuse entry to asylum seekers at the national border of Germany, in defiance of the Chancellor's own policies. If that had happened, it would have left the Chancellor with potentially a very difficult decision to make. Should she fire him? If she did that, that could lead to the collapse of the coalition government. Perhaps in the end she would be unlikely to survive the collapse of that government if there were fresh elections, or she could fold, accept that change of policy that the Interior Minister was planning to release, and that also could have posed some serious questions around whether she still had the authority to lead the German government. So that was what the day here started as. People were wondering what was going to happen. What did happen was a press conference by both of them. The Interior Minister basically, having had crisis talks with Merkel, agreeing to kick this down the road by a couple of weeks, issuing her essentially with an ultimatum, the kind of ultimatum that might have been unthinkable before last year's election, in which her government performed perhaps worse than many of her in her party were hoping. An ultimatum to say you must come up with the kind of EU solutions that you have not managed to come up with since the 2015 refugee crisis, or I will implement that plan.
All right, Guy Henderson for us there in Berlin and Daniel Wrenches in Washington. To you both, thank you.